All right, what's going on, you guys? Nick here with Nick's Nine the Power. So I want to do a countdown of my top 3 greatest bodybuilders to never turn pro in the IFBB. So all of these guys are going to be guys that competed at the highest level in the NPC, so national level competitors, and just for whatever reason were not able to get that IFBB pro card. So in my third place spot, we have a bodybuilder named Edgar Fletcher. So Edgar Fletcher, obviously, you can look at a couple of these pictures here and tell he had one of the greatest physiques, arguably, of all time. But the problem with Edgar was he was just simply unable to peak when the day of the show would come around. So between 1990 and the year 2000, Edgar Fletcher competed in 11 pro qualifying shows, and for whatever reason, he was not able to win and get that pro card. He placed third in the heavyweight division of those contests 5 times, and he placed 4th at those competitions twice. So he was within striking distance of a pro card at many of those shows, but he just was not able to get it done. So obviously today it's a lot easier to win a pro card. There's a lot more pro qualifiers, and they hand out more pro cards at shows than ever before. But in the 1990s, that was not the case, and it was much, much harder to turn pro. Maybe if he were competing today, he would have been able to get the pro card a little bit easier. But back then, things were a little bit tougher, and for that reason, I have him in the third place spot of one of the top 3 greatest bodybuilders to never become an IFBB pro. So in my second place spot, we have Rory Liitle Meyer, who's one of my favorite bodybuilders of all time. And in my opinion, regardless of being a pro or not, has one of the best classic physiques of all time. And he's obviously still alive today, and he's still pumping iron and training people over at Uptown Gym in Whittier, California. So he would get his start in weight training with pursuing a football career, but when that didn't pan out, he started to pursue bodybuilding. So his best bodybuilding titles would include the 1980 AAU Mr. California, and then the 1988 AAU Mr. America. Then obviously he would compete in the NPC throughout the early and mid-80s, trying to turn pro, specifically at the NPC Nationals and USAs. So he would compete at the NPC Nationals 4 times. His best placing would be in 1983, where he would place second. So that would be the closest he would come to a pro card. Then he competed in the 1987 NPC USAs, where he would place 9th. And then, of course, his most recent competition would be the 1994 NPC Nationals, where he would place 14th. So Rory is actually quoted to have said that his family comes before any bodybuilding competition, that he actually did not intend to become a pro bodybuilder. So some say it was by choice that he didn't. Others say it was just by bad luck that he was never able to turn pro in any of those qualifiers. But in my opinion, for a bodybuilder that competed in the 1970s and the 1980s, Rory Liitle Meyer arguably had one of the best classic physiques from that era to never see a pro stage. So we will have never known what he could have achieved in the IFBB, because I think he could have achieved a lot, especially during that era. So his height was 5'11", or 180 centimeters tall, and his contest weight was between 215 and 225 pounds, or 93 to 102 kilograms. So again, we have Rory Liitle Meyer in the second place spot of the best bodybuilders who I believe never turned pro. So the number 1 bodybuilder who I believe is the best bodybuilder to never turn pro in the IFBB would be Matt Mendenhall. So I believe Matt Mendenhall was the most genetically gifted bodybuilder to not hit an IFBB pro stage. And this was due to a series of injuries and unfortunate events that would not allow him to become pro and would set him back in his competitive career. But when he was in his prime and he was not being held back by injuries, he was one of the best bodybuilders on the face of the earth during the era that he competed in. To give you guys an example of how good Matt Mendenhall really was, in 1982 he competed at the NPC Nationals. In 1982, the winner of the NPC Nationals was a bodybuilder by the name of Lee Haney, who would go on to win 8 Mr. Olympias and become the winningest Mr. Olympia of all time, tied with Ronnie Coleman with the record of 8 Olympia wins. So in 1982, Matt Mendenhall came in second behind Lee Haney at that year's Nationals by only 1 point. So only 1 point separated Matt Mendenhall and the greatest Mr. Olympia of all time at that competition. So that 1982 second place finish to Lee Haney would arguably be one of the best years and placings of his career, because in 1983, his downward spiral would really begin. So right before the Nationals in 1983, he suffered from the flu for 3 weeks straight, and then he placed 4th at that year's Nationals. So he dropped in placings 2 places. In 1984, before the Nationals, he was involved in a major car crash where he was actually flung through the windshield of his car. So it was a very, very bad car crash. He was able to recover from that, come back and compete at the Nationals after this injury, and still place second behind Mike Christian. So even after that major setback, that's how good he was. He was able to come back and place second at Nationals after a car crash. And keep in mind, he was still only 24 years old at the time. So that's one of the things that was Matt's calling card, was very early on, he had a crazy developed physique. And that's why he was known as Mr. Genetics, because by the age of 17, he had already developed a physique that was way above and beyond any teenage bodybuilder. No one would even come close to the physique he was able to develop at that time. So in 1985, Matt Mendenhall finally won a major show. He won the NPC USAs, which qualified him to enter the NPC World Games that same year. So the World Games was held in London. So during Matt's flight to London, he retained a lot of water due to jet lag from the flight. Then he lost to Barry DeMay at that competition, who was absolutely shredded. Obviously, you guys know who Barry DeMay is, one of the greatest bodybuilders to come out of the 90s. Then in 1986, he would compete again at the NPC Nationals and place second for a third time. So Matt was starting to become disenfranchised with competitive bodybuilding, and then in 1987, he would drop from second place all the way to 10th place at NPC Nationals. And at this point, he finally decided to take some time away from the sport, and he pursued a college degree in homeopathic medicine. So Joe Weider begged him to make a comeback to the sport, and he finally did in 1991, where he would place 5th at the Nationals, and he would be done competing at that point. At the very young age of 31 years old, he finally took his leave from bodybuilding. So I think that maybe if Matt Mendenhall hadn't suffered all these accidents and injuries along the way, he may have been able to turn pro much earlier in his career. He wouldn't have had to suffer through the things that he suffered through in the late 80s when he was trying to turn pro still. Maybe he would have turned pro as early as 83. So that's really why I think he's the greatest bodybuilder to never turn pro. Number one, he lost to Lee Haney by 1 point. So obviously, like I said, Lee Haney is the greatest bodybuilder arguably of all time, next to Ronnie Coleman. And really, I think the real reason for Matt not turning pro was these injuries and setbacks. Had he not suffered them, I think he absolutely 100% would have become a pro bodybuilder. Then, of course, I've got to give an honorable mention to Victor Richards, who many people say is the greatest bodybuilder to never turn pro. But it's actually on record that he was offered a pro card and maybe turned it down. So there is some speculation that he was at one point an IFBB pro, but never competed as an IFBB pro. I think Weider offered him one, so he technically had a pro card, then he declined to ever compete. So that is why I didn't have Victor Richards in my top 3, because there's obviously some, sketchy circumstances regarding whether or not he was a pro. So thank you guys for watching the video. Please give it a thumbs up if you enjoyed it, and please let me know in the comment section below who your top 3 bodybuilders to never turn pro are. Thank you guys for watching. Nick Strength and Power, signing out.